She pushed open the door and froze. He was there, the most feared man in Chicago, the man whose name made grown men lower their eyes undone. Shaking, wounded, and alone, whispering her name in the dark like a prayer he never meant to say out loud. She should have run. Every instinct she had told her to turn around, walk down those stairs and pretend she had never climbed them. Instead, her legs carried her forward. She stepped inside. She locked the door behind her. And in that single moment, Alina Cole stopped being the maid and became the only woman Damon Volkov would ever need. The morning Alina almost spilled the coffee was the same morning everything quietly, irreversibly changed. She had been doing the same thing for 2 years. Up at 5:30, uniform pressed, hair pinned, tray in hand. 30 ft of Persian rug between the top of the staircase and the office door at the end of the west wing. She had walked that hallway so many times she could have done it blindfolded in the dark and her sleep. She knocked twice. "Come in." She turned the knob with her elbow, pushed through with her hip, and crossed the office in a straight line. Damon Volkov was behind his desk in a dark gray shirt, no jacket, reading a document. He didn't look up. He never looked up. That was the arrangement, unspoken but understood. She brought the coffee, he drank it, and she left. Neither of them acknowledged that anything else existed in that room. She made it 4 steps before her heel caught the fringe of the rug. The tray pitched forward. She felt the weight shift, felt the silver pot tipping, felt the exact second when physics decided the morning was going to go wrong. And then she felt his hand close around her wrist, firm, warm, unhurried. The tray leveled. She went still. He hadn't stood up. He had simply reached his arm across the desk, steady as a man who'd been halfway waiting for this exact moment, and caught her. His eyes never left the document in his other hand. "Careful," he said. One word, flat, quiet. She couldn't speak. His hand was warm through the fabric of her sleeve, warmer than a man that cold had any right to be. She could feel the heat pressing into her wrist like something that had been waiting for permission to exist. 3 seconds. He held on for 3 full seconds after the tray was stable. On the 4th, he let go. "You can leave it there." She set the tray on the edge of the desk, stepped back, clasped her hands in front of her apron, and gave a small curtsy. He didn't see and walked toward the door. That was when she felt it. The weight of his gaze caught her somewhere between the shoulder blades. Not looking, not exactly. More like being aimed at. She didn't turn around. She went down the main staircase and through the ground floor hallway all the way to the kitchen before she let herself breathe. Sloane already knew something had happened before Alina opened her mouth. Sloane always knew. It was her least convenient quality and her most valuable one. She turned from the stove, looked at Alina's face, looked at her hands, and set the spoon down. "What happened?" "I almost dropped the coffee." "Almost?" He caught it. Sloane went quiet. For Sloane, quiet was the same as shouting. Then she turned back to the stove and stirred with a focus she absolutely did not need. "Princess," she said lowly, "if he caught the coffee, it's because he didn't want the coffee to fall. If he caught your wrist, that is something entirely different, and you know it." "Sloane, just stating facts. You can argue with me, or you can go get some air. Both options are available." Alina chose the air. She went out the back door and stood in the cold of the November garden for 10 minutes, pressing her right wrist against the side of her apron, trying to understand why the place where his hand had been was still warm 2 hours later. The rest of the morning passed. The way mornings at the Volkov mansion always passed, quietly, carefully, with every person in the house moving like they were performing a play they had rehearsed too many times to feel anything doing it anymore. Alina changed sheets, dusted shelves, carried a stack of clean towels through the service corridor on the 2nd floor. It was in that corridor that she ran into him, not in his office, not on the main staircase, in the narrow service passage between the east and west wings, the one the maids used to move through the house without being seen, the one that was so tight 2 people could barely pass without touching. She came around the L-bend in the corridor and stopped. He was already there. Neither of them spoke. The sconce at the bend flickered once and went out. The only light left came from a small window at the far end of the passage, gray and thin. She pressed the stacks of towels against her chest like armor. He didn't move. His head was level with hers. His gaze, fixed somewhere over her shoulder like looking directly at her face, was a line he had decided in this particular corridor he could not cross. She heard him breathe. She lay back down and did not sleep. The intercom rang at 2 Wamar in the morning. She already had her hand on the receiver. Alina. Kirill's voice, no greeting. Come up with the big kit, now. The big kit was the Pakhan's emergency medical case locked in the service corridor cabinet, the key kept behind the kitchen clock. She had only brought it upstairs once in 2 years. She pulled her robe over her nightgown. Her hands were steady. She had decided somewhere on the walk to the cabinet that shaking was going to be a luxury she couldn't afford tonight. She took the main staircase up. The West Wing corridor was half lit. A security man near the office saw her, looked at the kit, and looked away. Kirill met her at the door before she could knock. He won't go to the hospital. I already tried. What happened? Knife wound. Right flank, muscle not organ, but it's deep. The doctor is an hour out. You're what we have right now. She went in. The bathroom door at the back of the office was cracked open. She crossed the Persian rug past the desk where the coffee tray still sat from the morning and stopped at the bathroom doorway. He was sitting on the edge of the marble tub, shirtless, barefoot. The gray dress pants stained dark down the right side. A white towel on the tile floor that was no longer white. The wound above his waistline was a clean line 3 and deep enough to make her breathe carefully before she knelt. He looked up. His face was washed. His eyes were the same gray. They always were the exact same gray as a November sky before snow, and they were calm in a way that was either inhuman or earned through too many rooms exactly like this one. "Close the door," he said. She closed it. She knelt on the mat, opened the kit, laid out what she needed in the order Mrs. Petrova had taught her during her first year at the house. Saline, gauze, anesthetic, suture, thread, needle. A maid who knew how to stitch was worth double in a house like this. She had thought that was a strange thing to be valued for. Right now, it felt like the only thing in the world that made any sense. "This is going to sting," she said. "I know." She poured the saline. He didn't flinch. Only his right hand, resting on his knee, slowly closed and opened, once a man taking exact measurement of his own control. She cleaned the wound. She applied the anesthetic. She waited the right amount of time. "Who did this?" she asked. It wasn't her business. It came out anyway. A man who thought he was going to survive the night. She didn't ask anything more. She threaded the needle. First stitch, second. She counted the way Mrs. Petrova had taught her, close to the edge, steady depth, consistent spacing. Her hand did not shake. On the 5th stitch, his voice came down quiet from above her. "You do this very well, Alina." She stopped. Not long. 1 second, maybe 2. Long enough to notice she'd done it. Long enough to know he had noticed, too. She kept going. "Thank you. It's not a compliment. It's an observation," she finished. Cut the thread. Applied the ointment, laid the gauze, pressed the tape down flat along both sides. Her own hands, the hands she had used 10,000 times to carry trays and fold sheets and wipe dust from piano keys, smooth and certain over a wound on the body of the most dangerous man in Chicago. She started putting the supplies back into the kit. That was when his hand came. Slow. No warning. He reached out and closed his fingers around her wrist, the right wrist, the same one he'd caught that morning over the coffee tray. Except this time his eyes were not on a document. They were on her face. She had no choice but to look up. The space between them was small. She was kneeling on the mat. He was seated on the edge of the tub, and their faces were almost level. His chest was inches from her. She could see the pulse moving in his throat, the damp strand of hair at his forehead, the old scar on his shoulder up close, badly healed, the kind of scar a man earns early and carries quietly for the rest of his life. His eyes moved to her mouth. She stopped breathing. His hand left her wrist and traveled upward. His thumb came to rest along the line of her jaw, still not pressing, simply there, as though he had finally allowed himself to touch something he had been deciding not to touch for a very long time. No man had ever touched her face like that, not in 23 years of living. She understood at that moment what the word shiver actually meant. Not the word as she had read it in books. The word was a real thing that moved through a real body without asking permission. His mouth moved toward hers, an inch, half an inch. She felt his breath against her upper lip. She smelled him warm, metallic, the night's work still on his skin underneath the soap. And she closed her eyes because closing her eyes was the only thing left she could do. Sloane was awake. Of course she was. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of tea in both hands, her hair pinned any which way, her eyes already waiting at the door. "Come here," Sloane said. "Sit down. I'm not asking any questions." Alina sat. Her hands began shaking the moment the chair caught her weight. Sloane pushed her mug across the table without a word, pulled her own chair close, sat beside her in the dark of the kitchen with the house still breathing wrong somewhere above them. She didn't ask any questions. She kept her word. But she looked at Alina over the rim of the mug, the way she looked at her when she knew absolutely and without argument that the girl she'd been watching for 2 years was no longer going to be the same girl by morning. The 2 days that followed were the longest of Alina's life. Not because anything dramatic happened, because nothing happened at all. That was worse. She saw him 3 times in the hallway from a distance. The first time he turned his head before she rounded the corner, as if he'd heard her footsteps and made a decision about them. The second time his office door was already closing when she came up the main staircase with the morning tray. The third time she arrived at his door and found another maid standing there instead. Natasha, younger, quieter, holding the coffee pot with both hands and looking confused about why she'd been reassigned without explanation. Mrs. Petrova hadn't given Alina a reason. She hadn't needed to. Alina went back to the kitchen, set the empty tray on the counter, and stood with her back to the room for 30 seconds while she decided not to feel anything about it. "He pulled the coffee away from you," Sloane said from behind the stove. She hadn't asked. She'd simply stated it like the weather. Mrs. Petrova reassigned the morning delivery. Same thing. "Sloane, I'm not saying anything. I'm cooking." Sloane cracked an egg against the skillet with more force than the egg deserved. "I'm cooking very loudly, and I have absolutely no opinions about what's happening in this house right now." Alina sat on the stool at the island and pressed her palms flat against the wood surface. She had stitched the man's side with her own hands. She had felt his thumb on her jaw. She had heard him say her name in a voice he hadn't meant to use, low and stripped of everything carefully, and now she was back to being invisible. Back to being the maid who carried towels through the service corridor and didn't exist in any hallway he chose to walk through first. Fine. She knew how to be invisible. She had been doing it for 2 years. She was very good at it. What she was not good at was pretending the warmth on her wrist had gone cold. That was the problem. That was the specific, inconvenient, entirely unreasonable problem she could not solve by folding linen or dusting shelves or doing any of the 30 other tasks she threw herself into over the next 48 hours to keep her hands from remembering what they'd touched. She pressed her palms harder against the wood. "He's afraid," Sloane said quietly. "He's not afraid of anything. The most dangerous men in the world are afraid of exactly one thing." Sloane flipped the egg without looking, losing what they can't replace. Alina didn't answer. She picked up a dish towel and folded it into thirds, precise and tight, and told herself that was the end of the conversation. It wasn't the end of anything. The woman in the red coat arrived that afternoon. Alina was on the front portico signing for a flower delivery, white lilies and dark roses in black paper, the weekly arrangement, when the black car pulled up and the door opened and the woman stepped out like she owned the gravel she was standing on. Red coat belted at the waist, black heels, dark hair pulled back, lips the same color as the coat. 30-something with the kind of posture that came from never once having to ask permission to walk through a door. She looked at Alina the way a person looks at furniture. "Honey?" Her accent dragged the vowels. "Aren't you going to help me with the bag?" Alina didn't move. "Who are you, ma'am?" "Zoya Ivanov, guest of the family." She climbed the last 3 steps without waiting and walked past. Alina opened the front door like the house was hers and pushed the leather bag into Alina's free hand without making eye contact. "Tell the patron I'm here." And she walked in. Alina stood on the portico with the flower bouquet in one hand and the woman's bag in the other, the cold lake forest wind climbing up her legs, the smell of Zoya's perfume still hanging in the air like a declaration. She did not know yet what the woman in the red coat was going to cost her. She would find out soon enough. Breakfast the next morning was the first move. Alina carried the coffee tray into the breakfast room at 7:40 and found Zoya already seated with a book she wasn't reading and a smile she wasn't feeling. Kirill was at the doorframe with his arms crossed. 2 other maids were pretending to arrange things at the sideboard. "Good morning," Alina said, setting the tray down. Zoya looked up. "Good morning, honey. Bring the coffee here." Alina picked up the pot, crossed the room, and poured. Her hand was steady. She was proud of that. Back to the kitchen. Sloane took one look at her face and reached for the bread dough with both hands. What did she do? Calluses, in front of everyone. Sloane's jaw tightened. "I'm going to make her coffee weak for the rest of her stay." "Sloane, I'm going to make it so weak she complains to the pakhan in front of his whole table, and I'm going to look directly into his eyes and say, 'I'm so sorry, sir. I tried to make it the way your guest likes. It's going to be the finest moment of my career.'" Despite everything, Alina laughed, short and genuine from a place in her chest she hadn't visited in 2 days. She looked down at her hands, the callus on her right thumb, the old cut mark on her index finger. The hands of a girl from the south side of Chicago who had started cleaning apartments at 17 to pay for her brother Callum's school, who had washed her mother's body at 18 and kept going because stopping wasn't a choice she could afford. The hands that had walked through the Volkov gates 2 years ago with a crumpled letter of recommendation and the clear-eyed knowledge of exactly what kind of house this was. The calluses could stay. They had earned their place. Lunch was when Zoya made her second mistake. The dining table was set for 5. Grigory Rostov on Damon's right, Kirill behind the pakhan's chair, Zoya installed at Damon's left like she'd reserved that seat in advance. 2 men from the Chicago side down at the far end talking in Russian. Alina and Olga were serving. Everything was quiet until Zoya lifted her wine glass, looked across the table at Alina, and said in English, loud enough to bury every other conversation in the room, "Damon, is this the girl who serves the coffee? She moves beautifully, very attentively, very gracefully. It's a shame about the hand situation." The silence that followed was not an ordinary silence. Alina was serving Grigory's plate. Her hand did not move. Kirill's eyes shifted from Zoya to Damon in one motion. Damon set down his silverware, slowly. The silver made a single small sound against the porcelain. He turned his head toward Zoya with the exact calm of a man who had never once needed to raise his voice to be the most dangerous person in a room. "Zoya." "Yes, Damon. This woman has worked for me for 2 years, not for you. You are a guest in this house out of courtesy, not contract. The next time I hear any comment of any kind from you about any maid in my house, you'll be having breakfast somewhere else. Is that clear?" Zoya opened her mouth. "Is that clear?" It wasn't a question. Clear. He picked up his silverware and cut his meat as if the entire exchange had never taken place. Grigory did not look up from his plate. Alina saw the corner of his mouth move in something that was the closest that old man ever came to approval. Olga breathed for the first time in a full minute. Alina kept serving, Eyes down, hands steady, heart doing something in her chest she did not have a word for yet. Quiet and warm, and whole and dangerous all at the same time. When she walked out of the dining room with the empty tray, she felt his eyes lift from his plate and find her at the door. She did not look back. She didn't need to. That evening, the cars went out again. She watched from the service wing window at 8:30 headlights crossing the gravel in a long sweep and disappearing through the gate. Damon walked out last, jacket buttoned, collar up, not looking at any particular window. "Where are they going?" she asked Sloane. "Somewhere I don't want to know about," Sloane said without turning around. "And neither do you." Alina went to bed at 11. She did not sleep. She lay in the dark, listening to the house the way she had been listening to it for 2 years, tracking every sound through the ventilation duct, the distant click of a door, the creak of a floor, until the cars came back. She heard them at 3:00 in the morning, slower than they'd left, heavier on the gravel. One door slamming before the others, then the footsteps. She got out of bed. She went down the service stairs without a light. The kitchen was empty. She cut through the side hallway and reached the main hall just as they came through. Damon was walking on his own, but he was walking crooked. The collar of his white shirt was stained dark red on the right shoulder, old and dried, and lower down, still wet, still bleeding. One hand pressed against the wound, the other hung loose at his side, fingers dark to the nail. Kirill had a hand on his elbow, 2 men in black behind them. One of those men was limping. Damon passed 6 FT from where she stood against the wall. He turned his head. His eyes found hers and held. 1 full second, in which she saw everything he was holding together by force of will alone, and in which he saw that she was seeing it. And neither of them did anything about it because there was nothing to do, because he kept walking. He went up the main staircase. His bedroom door closed. Kirill came back down 2 minutes later, said 2 sentences in Russian into his radio, then stopped at the foot of the stairs and water and gauze and antiseptic, tucked a clean towel over her arm, and went up the service stairs in the dark. She knew every step by heart. She had counted them 2,000 times. She did not make a sound. The West Wing corridor was half lit. The security guard at the entrance was gone. She crossed 30 FT of hallway runner and stopped at his bedroom door. It was cracked open, a thin line of lamplight on the floor. In 2 years at the Volkov mansion, she had never seen his bedroom door left open. Not once. Doors in this house were either fully closed or fully open. A gap was a mistake, and men like him did not make that kind of mistake. She pressed her ear to the space. The sound came again, low, rough, the sound of a man reaching for something in the dark that wasn't pain relief, something closer to forgetting. Who? She should have gone back down. She knew it. Every sensible part of her brain was lined up at the door, giving her very clear instructions about the service stairs and the kitchen and the glass of water still sitting on the table. She pushed the door open anyway, and she saw. He was on the bed bare from the waist up, the gauze on his shoulder already in place under someone's hurried hands. The gray dress pants open at the hip. His eyes were closed. His head tipped back against the headboard. His left hand rested on his own abdomen. His right hand is lower. His face, the face she had watched stay perfectly still through coffee trays and board meetings, and a knife wound to the side, was undone. Jaw tight, mouth parted. Every carefully maintained line of control is gone. And then he said it, quietly, like it had slipped out without asking. Alina. The tray left her hands. The pitcher hit the runner and rolled. The gauze pack bounced off the hardwood. The towel fell without a sound. He opened his eyes. For 3 full seconds, neither of them moved. His hand where it was, her hand over her mouth. His gray eyes went from her face to the open door to the tray on the floor and back to her face. "I didn't see anything," she said. Her voice came out in a thread. He didn't move. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he has been bracing for from a very long distance and has finally arrived. "You shouldn't lie to me, Alina." Low, no anger, the voice of a man who had just lost control in front of the one witness in the world he could not afford, and who was at this moment discovering that the control was not coming back tonight regardless. She should have run. She knew she should have run. "Is that why?" she said in a voice she didn't entirely recognize. "You've been avoiding me for 3 days." He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the mask was gone. All of it. For the first time in 2 years, she was looking at him without the glass between them. Yes. For how long? He looked at her for a long moment before he answered. 2 years. The floor did not move. The walls did not move. But something in the room shifted so completely that she would spend the rest of her life marking time from this side of that sentence. "You knew," she said, "every time you turned your face away before I did." "Yes." "Then why?" He took a slow breath. The effort of sitting up pulled at the shoulder wound, and she saw it cross his face, but he sat up anyway. Because he was not going to have this conversation lying down. "Because a woman close to me is a marked woman. I have already buried people I loved over less. You are the only clean thing in this house, and I was not going to be the one who ruined that." "You don't have the right," she said, "to decide what I'm strong enough to choose. To decide I'm too fragile to know my own mind." "I know. That's not yours to decide." "I know that, Elena." His voice broke on her name, just slightly, just enough. "I know." She did not decide to walk forward. Her legs made the decision and her body followed. And then she was standing at the foot of his bed, and his eyes were coming up to find hers in the dark. And she said the only true thing she had left. "I came up to help with the dressing, Elena, but I didn't come up to leave." He looked at her for a long time without speaking. Then he held out his left hand palm up and waited.